Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. We wanted to come on and do a video kind of just talking about GNM in general and what makes it so different than pretty much every other natural health paradigm, specifically, within the German New Medicine Self-Healing Support Group. It's a different group. It's a different than your normal natural health group where you just kind of, refer to natural health answers like, parasites and look at toxins and go to a neurologist, kind of your typical answers to, okay, what do I do with this health problem? And I know that world because I was in that world for very many years and still am to some extent. It's just that within German New Medicine, things are different. There's a lot of nuance to the understanding of health, of what you do intervention-wise from a German New Medicine perspective. And so I wanted to touch on a few of those things just so that people who are kind of brand new to this world, or that even if you've been in it for a while, talking about some of these details because they make a profound difference. And it's really interesting. I found within German New Medicine that obviously it's very much a biological science. Like Dr. Hammer did extensive biological research to draw these connections. So each different layer of the embryo. So we've got these different embryological germ layers from which all of our tissues are formed. So he looked at the science of each specific tissue and then looked at, okay, what is the skin? What is the basic skin tissue that the skin is made out of? What is the biological program associated with it? So it's very biological in nature. It's not woo-woo. It's not metaphysical. It's not, weird out there kind of just mind stuff. It's very physical, but in as far as the interventions and as far as like what do you do about it, it is very, I guess, metaphysical. It's very much working with your mind and your perception and how you're seeing your world. And it kind of comes down to one of these fundamental principles that we teach in our kind of more, I guess, mental, physics, spiritual type of work, which is that you, as the individual, you are the first cause of everything in your experience. And some people may be new to this type of thinking, but being first cause means that everything about your experience is coming from you. That there is no outside thing that causes a problem within you. It is you, it's the individual, it's your perception, it's something going on within you that is the initiator, is the cause of everything in your experience. And the really cool thing about being first cause for everything in your life, it means that you're the person that can change it. There's not some kind of outside force that is outside of your control that you just can't do anything about. And because that's the thing, even in natural health realms, it's like your hands are tied in some regard if it's a toxin. I was exposed to a toxin and now there's this toxin in my body and now this toxin is causing all of these problems. There's this parasite, there's this gene, there's this thing that I can't do anything about, that I've got to go to all of these, therapies and practitioners and try to get this thing out of me so then hopefully I can, get back to the health that I want. But it's just this notion of getting rid of second cause and realizing that you are first cause for everything in your experience, which is so fundamentally different than everything else that we see in the natural health world. And so that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today. And I'm going to shut this window because there's a chainsaw or something out there.
I did. I told that guy it was okay to keep sawing.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't have been. Like you're in a conversation with someone, they're like, oh yeah, we're doing work on our house. We're trying not to make too much noise. And you go, oh, don't worry about it. And then the next day they really don't worry about it. That might be what's happening, but it's okay. It's nice. One thing. So the main thing I do in my work with people in terms of just like advising them and life experience stuff and showing them how to create the kind of life they want, I don't necessarily always describe it this way because it sounds kind of weird at first, but very often the most accurate explanations about what's going on, the most accurate descriptions about what's happening seem kind of weird to people who haven't really heard much about what's going on. And a lot of it has to do with information processing. It's how I relate to information. It's like, and am I aware of not just the information to which I'm being exposed? Am I also aware to the patterns that I have when it comes to how I interact with information? How do I interact with information that is, what I call triggering to me? How do I interact to information that's unfamiliar to me? How do I interact with information that contradicts what I already believe? How do I interact with information that's different than what I've heard before, but that I'm interested in warming up to, but can't quite get my arms around, or can't quite see clearly, or can't quite get a feel for? You know what I'm saying? Doesn't quite compute. How do I respond to these things? And very rarely does getting all pissed off or getting offended or getting afraid or getting overwhelmed or getting upset or getting confused, very often are those the most resourceful responses to intersecting with a bit of information, regardless of what that information is. However, if I'm limited in my responses to kind of unfamiliar things, I'll tend to kind of like default to what I've got, regardless of whether and to what extent that response is really going to serve me. And so that's kind of how I come to all of this stuff. It's like, a lot of the problems that come up when people intersect with information, it's not because of the information, and it's not because of them. It's because of their patterns of interacting with information of a certain type. And so a lot of the time, so when someone says, I feel upset about what you said, sometimes what I'll say is, okay, we can talk about what I said and whether I should have said it or could have said it differently. But before we do that, I'd like to talk to you about whether you'd like to feel differently about what I said. Because it's possible to do that, and I can help you if you want, And so that's kind of, it's kind of a layer that's unseen and that people don't really often discuss. And so I kind of wanted to put it out there. Like, that's where I'm coming from, which is pretty wacky, but you have a ton of flexibility up there in terms of your response to things. When it comes to G&M, really when it comes to anything, I think a lot of what we're doing here is we're trying to make explicit a lot of stuff that's kind of unspoken in groups and tribes and organizations and paradigms and all this different stuff. A lot of this stuff is just kind of like the unspoken rule, but I find it's useful to kind of really elucidate this stuff and kind of put it out there, right? So that we can talk as human beings, as individuals, and then have a discussion as teachers of G&M or teachers of personal growth and someone who's interested maybe in what we have to say. If we can connect as individuals first, I think is really useful. And there are paradigms, or these ways of thinking. There are these kind of like meta philosophies about health, illness, the nature of illness, what matters, what doesn't, what's important, what's not, so on and so forth. And, they're like these little sandboxes, because you go to one person and the most important thing in the world is your food. And you go to another person, and the most important thing is your genes. And you go to another person, the most important thing is your mind, your perception, your subjective experience. And in order really to talk about reality, what's really true out there, right? There's something that is, right? That is true about health, true about the universe, true about whatever. In order to be able to talk about it, we have to come up with models. We have to come up with representations of that reality. We have to use language to describe our experience, language to describe other people's experience and all of this. And necessarily those models are not 100% accurate, right? Because they can't be, because I can't talk to you about everything that's true. I have to kind of narrow it down. I have to give you kind of the Cliff's Notes version of that. And when you come to the G&M group or the self-healing support group, we're kind of quite fastidious about making sure that G&M is what's talked about. You know what I'm saying? And that is not because, and it's certainly not from my perspective, and I don't think it's from yours either, it's not because we think you shouldn't hear anything else. I want to be very clear about that. It's not, if someone's talking about nutrition and we're kind of like, from the G&M perspective, that's not accurate, or that's not relevant, or that's misleading. I am not saying it's not true. I'm not saying it's not useful. I'm saying we want to be very clear here about what German New Medicine has to say about this particular thing that's going on. Being very specific about what's discussed in a given group does not mean that we think you should only hear those things. Mm-hmm. I have no interest in limiting anyone's exposure to any information whatsoever, because that to me is limiting your choice. What we want to do is, to the best of our ability, present a very clear and a very pure, kind of unadulterated view of our understanding about what G&M says. And there's a couple of, like, when I'm working with people, I want to be able to communicate ideas to them that are going to be maximally useful. But I also want to make it very clear to them that this is one idea among many that they may find useful. This is one tool. I'm a wrench salesman. I'm a drill salesman. I'm a chainsaw salesman. If that's true, I'm going to sell the best version of that I can, the most useful, the most powerful. And I want to make sure that you understand how to use it and all the ways it can be used and how you don't want to use it because it might hurt you or produce a result that you don't want. That doesn't mean I don't think that you shouldn't be buying other tools, using other tools, accessing other tools. And, I think that's a really important thing, because we want to keep it pure here so that you know, but we also want you to know that we know that we're presenting a paradigm to you and that it's not the only paradigm that exists. And the fact that we're talking to you doesn't mean that we think you shouldn't listen to other people. I think that's a really important thing. And it's for me, it sets up a situation where there can be a real kind of consent, where there's this kind of consensual exchange of ideas where I know and you know that I know what's happening here is that we're conveying information here that you might find useful. One of my favorite things to say at the end of, like, if you've ever read the things that I write for, like this one, and they still haven't made an iPad or a computer screen big enough to capture it all, even on like a big iMac. At the end of a big long spiel where I go into all these different things that I think and so on and so forth, I'll say, of course, that's just one way of talking about thinking about it. And that to me is my little addendum. It's just like, you might find this stuff useful. To the extent that you find this useful where you are, I encourage you to use it. However, there's no idea should restrict or confine you. No belief should restrict or confine you. No paradigm, indeed, should constrict or refine you. These are things that we kind of step into and that we work from within and that we use. And this is really a different way of relating to information. It has nothing specific to do with German New Medicine at all. But it's kind of something I think that's almost like a spiritual commitment that we have. It's a philosophical kind of deeply held thing. And it colors so much of everything about how we interact with information. I mean, it covers something like the only reason that I learned as much about German New Medicine as I did, mostly through Melissa, was because I had this particular way of relating to information. If I basically had a take it or leave it philosophy of it's true, it's not, it's real, it's not, it's this and nothing else, or something else and not this at all, I would have never gotten to the point that I am when it comes to German New Medicine. I had to have that ability to kind of try it on, to play with it, to learn, to kind of install within myself a German New Medicine decision-making algorithm that says, oh, there's a symptom in my body. There's a symptom in someone's body. Oh, someone's experiencing this experience. What does GNM say about this? So I put the GNM hat on and I ask myself questions. And I say, okay, given what German New Medicine says about this, what's the best course of action for me to take? Okay, cool, I've got that. I think I've got that down. Now, given what, I don't know, pick your, whatever other health intervention you want, what do they say? And what I would look for is consistencies between those two things. Can I do what everything that makes sense to me is telling me to do? If it's traditional medicine, if it's kind of nutritional stuff or whatever, figure out to what extent you can incorporate all of those things kind of without compromising one or the other. Is doing this nutritional stuff inconsistent, or is it non-compatible or incompatible with German New Medicine? Probably it isn't. In most cases, it's not. A lot of times it's well, how do you feel about it? How are you going to respond to it? And so I think that's that flexibility and that information is empowerment, ideas and beliefs is empowerment is kind of hugely important. So that's my huge preamble.
Yeah, it's hugely important. And I'll tell you guys, like this for me, the shifting of mindsets and paradigms and this flexibility was not something I was naturally good at. I'm very, because I was raised in a very kind of traditionally like dogmatic type of mindset where it's like, there's one way and that's the one way and you better do the one way and the one way is the one way. And everyone needs to be doing that. And it's kind of like, proselytize everybody else to get them on this one path with you. And so like my opening up to different ways, different perspectives, different ways of thinking about things, it not being like the be all end all bottom line, like this kind of ever evolving understanding of the world and being able to kind of date these beliefs and not marry and settle down with one and say, oh, I don't care about any new information. This is the way that it is for me. I used to be that way. And so it was very tempting to do that with GNM at first. But that flexibility is so important. But something that I have kind of come around to, and the reason that GNM resonates so deeply within me is because, one, I can test it all day, every day based on my perception, what's going on with my body, just this like constant paying attention to cause and effect and, initiating circumstance and my response to it and what's going on. I found that to be incredibly accurate in my own experience. And then literally everyone I've ever talked to or worked with this information, it's accurate across the board. And then also there's this element of this first cause, this personal power that I feel like most every other health paradigm, it puts it off at least a little bit. I was watching, because I'm just, kind of interested in what the people who, I interact with, what are they listening to? What are they really interested in? Now, a lot of people are really interested in this medical medium guy and, drinking celery juice and kind of doing his whole thing. So I watched a video of his the other day, and it's like, he's got some good info, he's trying to empower people by making better choices with their diet and stuff, but he talks so much about this bacteria and this virus and this toxin and all this bad stuff, and basically, kind of paints this really dismal picture of the world that we live in, and like, and it all comes down to the liver, and it's just the liver and your skin problems, all these problems that come back to the liver. Kind of convenient, he just wrote a book about the liver. But, it just so much of what I heard was there are so many things that you can't do anything about, that are scary, that are outside of you, that are attacking you, and so here are some good things that you can do. And the thing I love about GNM and what Dr. Hammer discovered regarding viruses and bacteria, how they are all responses. They're not attackers. They are, biological, they're helpers. They're there to help us during the cleanup process of a previous conflict that was already resolved. And so, so just kind of looking back into these worlds, and, I probably used to, if my old mindset exploring that stuff would have been, oh yeah, his stuff is, Erica says his diet is really restrictive too, so that's the thing, is how does a restrictive diet, a person's perception of that, he's not talking about how important that is, that you not feel restricted. You may choose to do a particular diet, but your experience of that diet is extremely important. It should make you feel comfortable and like you're doing the very best thing, and that you can have all of the things that you want. If you're feeling restricted, if you're feeling starved in any way, that can initiate a whole nother conflict. And so that's the thing, is I'm just finding more and more that like you could go to like the smartest, most well-meaning, natural health doctor who's written all these books and has all these accolades and so many, millions of followers. But honestly, like if they don't know and acknowledge the 5 biological laws, they're missing a piece of the puzzle, and you're not getting the full story. And I don't necessarily, I think that is very like an honest description. I don't think it's kind of arrogant. Oh, you don't know the information I know, so you don't know anything. I think it's just you're missing a piece of the puzzle. And that was the thing when I learned about GNM, I was just like mind blown. Like I was missing a piece of the puzzle. Like this was all of the information that I gave my patients for, years. I was scaring the heck out of my patients because I thought it was for their best benefit, that, them being scared to eat sugar would make them not eat sugar, and the sugar feeds the cancer, from my own old mentality. So I thought I was doing them a service when I was doing them a disservice, because anytime they had a little bit of sugar, found out something they ate had sugar in it, that freak out, that, oh my gosh, I'm feeding the cancer cells in my body. That's what Dr. Melissa said. That was something that, in retrospect, I would not have done had I known, had I had the full picture, the full story. And so that's why GNM's a game changer. Like it changes everything that even the natural health world says about health. Another interesting kind of nuance regarding GNM is even the whole notion of like negative emotions, so for years, people have seen like psychosomatic, mind-body connection. You harbor these negative emotions in your body. You have resentment, you have anger. I was reading a book, it's kind of like from the early 1900s, talking about how anger and resentment, it causes like acid in your joints. And they believed that to be the thing that caused like arthritis. And even that, how it's closer, it's so much closer, like even, Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza and Louise Hay in her book, You Can Heal Your Life. She talks about all these different emotions that you hold on to and you have inside of you, and it causes these diseases. That's still an understanding of disease as a bad thing. You have bad emotions, your body has a bad response, and so there's bad disease in your body. There's acid in your joints, there's a tumor that formed as a bad thing. But the thing from the GNM perspective is none of it's bad. It's all response, and it's all, it's not like you're being punished for harboring negative emotions in your body, which is what it can feel like, as this kind of, this retribution, this punishment. You held anger for a long time, now you've got heart disease. You had, this problem, and now you've got this disease. But that's not how it is. It's, you had an emotional, biological experience as an organism that puts you into fight or flight mode, and your body adapted to that in the very best way that it knew how based on its evolutionary biology. It adapts. That's good. That's right. That should happen. You don't want to live in a body where you can't make these adaptations, where if you have to sprint away from, what we saw coyote today when we were taking our dog out for a run. And it's like, if that coyote came towards us and we needed to fight it or run away from it, we wouldn't want our body to be unable to adapt to that. We wouldn't want extra cells to not build in our lungs or for our heart rate to not increase at that alarming situation. You want that to happen. These biological adaptations are there for a reason. They're for survival. It's just when they go on for a very long time, that adaptation process can become, a large mass. It can become, a major reconstruction site that needs a lot of repair after years of adaptation. Again, based on our biology, animals would never be going through biological conflicts that lasted for years at a time, but we do. And so that's where we have to learn what this stuff is all about. We have to learn about our experience and our perception. But at no point along the way, there's nothing bad that's happened. Adaptation is not a bad thing. Repair and restoration is not a bad thing. And so when you have the idea and the story in your mind that this disease, this thing is bad, it's a punishment for bad emotions that I had, even that is an inaccuracy, this kind of cause and effect, like it's a punishment rather than just a response. I think that nuance is really important too, because it just changes the way you feel about yourself, your perception, and what your body has done.
One thing that's really important is this idea that nature doesn't necessarily work perfectly. Nature's not out for perfection. Nature just works well enough. So if you look at, for example, evolutionary theory, and whether you're into that or not, it doesn't matter. Let's step into that sandbox for a minute. It's not that organisms evolve to be perfect and they never evolve to do anything that's not perfect for their situation. It's just that whatever exists was useful enough at some point to have been carried on to the next generation, which means that one, as contexts change, as situations change, things that were useful 17 generations ago may not be particularly useful now because the context has changed so much. One of the big things is that every behavior makes perfect sense in the context in which it is occurring. That means every behavior you and I engage in, that our kids engage in. It also means every biological behavior that we as organisms, that our genes develop the capacity to engage in, makes sense in the context in which it started. You know what I'm saying? And this is one of those, a classic Dr. Phil quote, which is that things often begin for one reason and continue for another. Things often begin because they confer some kind of survival advantage at some point in our evolutionary history. So that's why they started, and they continue for another. For example, it just wasn't bad enough or ineffective enough or disadvantageous enough to get weeded out. And so I think one of the big things is that we're at an interesting stage as organisms because our brains have grown so much and our mind has expanded so much that a lot of these cellular adaptations are no longer really particularly useful in the modern life in which we're operating here, because our genes over the last 10,000 years have changed hardly at all. Over the last 100,000 years, or the fundamental structure of our genetic makeup has altered very, very little, but our world has completely changed. The types of frights, scares, conflicts that we're coming into contact with are completely different. Now, if I prepare myself with a certain skill set, if I had a Stone Age skill set as a man, and I suddenly was transplanted to here and now, to what degree would that Stone Age skill set translate to my office work or to my artistic work or to my whatever, my computer work? Not very well. But we got pre-Stone Age, really, biological programs that have been translated into a postmodern age. And so that's when I think one of the things where people will say sometimes, how could this be adaptive? How could this have ever been useful? Mm-hmm. Well, we have to understand that, when this particular biological program developed, it wasn't being activated in response to a fight with your mother-in-law, right? It was developed in response to the ancient biological equivalent of that, which was much more literal, much more physical, much more in your face, much less cerebral, much less mentally complex. And so I think we have bodies that are responding to experiences that this hugely powerful mind is creating. And if we don't want to get those responses, I don't particularly want to develop heart disease because I got a problem with my neighbor moving too close to my house. I don't want that to happen. The fact that it makes sense in my evolutionary history that might occur doesn't, for me, make it a more appealing option. Do you know what I'm saying? The fact that it makes sense that I would develop this tumor or whatever, I don't want to have it happen. And so I think the key thing there is I got this mind that has a capacity to worry about this stuff. I've got this mind that has a capacity to create these experiences that send a signal to my old body. It's old-fashioned. So you're talking to older people, talking to your parents, your grandparents, or whatever. They say some stuff that may be vaguely inappropriate. They say some stuff that's maybe a little off color or something. It's because they're speaking in a way that was appropriate in the context of their time. But things have changed rapidly and it's no longer appropriate. When I'm talking to my body, I got to speak to my body. I got to understand my body's language. If my body says something coarse or crass or politically incorrect or whatever, if my body starts doing something I don't want it to do, rather than fighting it or being afraid of it or trying to disown it or whatever, I say, okay, listen, I understand this makes sense. I understand my history is much longer than I realize that it is, right? I start remembering things from about the time I was, very early childhood. But I have a sort of genetic lineage that extends far back into the mists of time, and this body, or at least the code that tells this body what to do, has been responding to reality for a lot longer than I have, and it's responding to a reality that doesn't exist anymore. And so learning to tailor my communication to that is super important. And I think for me, the believability of this model it increases so much when I understand that there's a difference in saying everything the body does is absolutely perfect and saying everything the body does makes sense when we view it in the full context of what's going on. It's kind of like in that article about the person who keeps pulling the fire alarm, but they think they're doing the right. It's like imagine someone's in an office, works in an office with you or something, and they're from a different country and they speak a different language, and in their language the word hello means fire. So that they just like sometimes in different languages the same word or sound means something different. So every time someone walked into this room and said hello to them, they ran over and tried to flip the fire switch. Right? That's a miscommunication. That person, their behavior makes sense given their understanding of what they're experiencing. The body makes sense, and everything the body's doing, even so-called disease processes, from the German medicine perspective, makes sense given what the body's interpretation of those experiences are. And I think our job in our business really is to learn to kind of modify our experience. And now I think in terms of this being completely different than other natural health paradigms and stuff, can you see how discussions of nutrition send the mind off down this path that it's so easy to go down, and that 99% of the world is trying to pull you down for weight loss, for healthcare, for everything. It's just we're so primed to go down there, because I think there's the thing, there's the reality, there's what is, and there's our awareness of it. And what's really interesting is that we tend to be very aware of what we are aware of, and we tend to be completely oblivious, completely unaware of our awareness of the thing. And the whole kind of premise of this first cause stuff, which we've kind of made a connection to GNM because of GNM's focus on subjective experience and the body's response and reaction to it. The whole idea of this first cause stuff is that my awareness of a thing is an active and a causal element in the reality that I am aware of. So, I see through my awareness of a thing, I see the thing I am aware of, right? And so what that would mean is, so for example, if I become aware of or convinced that a particular nutritional supplement is going to cure my illness, and I take that thing and I get better, most people who have that experience or go a traditional medical route or whatever, they saw the doctor, they did the exercise program, they ate the food, whatever, they got better. Most people are hyper aware of what they did. And they're very oblivious to their awareness of that thing as the saving grace. They're to what degree were they convinced that was going to be the thing that was going to save them? To what degree did their mindset, did their experience shift as a result of finding what was going to be for them the answer, the key, the solution, the holy grail, the panacea for all of their health problems? And what we're doing is kind of calling attention to the awareness of the thing, that this consciousness, there are spiritual traditions that say that consciousness really is God, that awareness of being is this prime moving creative force. And I think the useful thing about GNM is that, I mean, at least the way that we tend to teach it, I don't know how other people teach the practical end of this, is that it is forever drawing your attention back to something that, if it isn't consciousness, if it isn't first cause, is very closely allied to it and with it. I don't know how to understand subjective experience, perception, and all this different stuff without getting into the realm of consciousness. I had a conflict shock. Why? Because I perceived this as being basically someone was encroaching upon my territory. I was afraid of losing my child, I was afraid of dying, or whatever. Those are experiences that we're referring to. Those are subjective, kind of mental, humanistic, human being experiences that the body is constantly responding to. Then we start saying, okay, well, I don't want to experience this conflict. I don't want to be susceptible to experiencing these kind of conflicts. I want to be able to respond to reality without being conflicted by it, right? Because I don't need, I don't know, I don't need I don't literally need my knees reinforced because I'm devaluing myself in some respect to my physical abilities. I mean, the problem is that my knees actually aren't strong enough. Do you know what I mean? So I want to be able to modify my experience of that. I want to be able, and this is way before G&M, my whole thing was, how can I help people improve what it's like to be them? And a real kind of essential component to that is this kind of psychological antifragility, this ability to respond to reality without creating a lot of bad feelings first. And, you know, one of the things that you said that was super interesting was this whole idea that, like, bad emotions cause bad things to happen. There's so much value judgment in that. There's so much awareness of what we don't want. There's so much, there's just so much that's not helpful in that description. That's not an elegant model of reality or way of understanding. It's not useful. And I know this because when I first started doing this myself, when I first started working with people, when you label something as bad, people don't stop doing it. They keep doing it, and then they feel bad about the fact they did it. You know, they feel guilty about the fact that they did it. As soon as I identify something as that something is not allowed, I have this almost insurmountable urge and inclination to do that thing. It creeps up on me, and I find myself doing it. I'm like, oh no. If I can label a thing as unresourceful, though, it's much easier to stop doing it. This doesn't really serve me. It's not bad. It's not wrong necessarily. I'm not making a commentary on that. I'm just saying it doesn't seem to serve me. And it's funny, if I talk about negative emotions, what that is, it's just more externalization. What does it matter whether it's lead or a virus or a negative emotion? That is, there's something called a nominalization. And that is this process by which I take something that's a process, that's an activity, a phenomenon, an active ongoing thing, and I turn it into a noun. I turn it into a static object, right? And so, for example, like we do this a lot with feelings. It's like, I am sad. And really, sadness kind of is a process. It's an activity of thinking, and it's a kind of emotional feedback loop and all this. But if I turn it and I chunk it down, I've got depression. You know, the thing is, if I can't put it into a wagon, I don't have it. You know what I'm saying? If you got kids, you can put kids in a wagon. If you got money, you can put money in a wagon. If you've got bricks, you can put bricks in a wagon, but you can't put depression in a wagon. And so to refer to it as if it were a noun is to nominalize the thing, is to take a process which can be intervened with, a process that can be modified, a process that can be changed, a process that can be stopped, a process that can be replaced with another one, and you give it this kind of physical thing. You know, I'm not angry. I'm not doing anger. I have anger problems. Here they are. Look at them. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's what happens with these negative emotions. And it's more the same crap, really, because what happens is, and actually we've even seen this happen in the G&M group. People kind of occasionally kind of have like a little kind of snide remark or something where they're like, they blame conflicts for everything. They're blaming conflicts for everything. And that's a way of thinking that to me suggests the person hasn't quite grasped what the word conflict represents in the G&M paradigm. Not that they don't agree with it, because I think disagreeing with something is totally fine. I would like for you to understand what you're disagreeing with. You know, if it's something that I have said, if I can facilitate an understanding and then you still disagree, I think that's really wonderful. But I just would like to facilitate the understanding. I can nominalize that too. I can turn conflict into a virus, and I do it by what? I do it by, what's the difference in there being something I have no control over in myself called a conflict, and there being something I have no control over in myself called bacteria or called a virus? It's the same thing. It's just a mind bug instead of another one. It's not a thing. It's an activity. And that's one of the huge things for us is we want to turn this into things that you're doing. We want to turn a self-devaluation conflict from something that happens to you into something that you're doing. And I want you to have the experience of doing that so that you know what it means to be devaluing yourself, so that you can then exercise a conscious choice about whether you want to do it or not. Because I know that when a person chooses consciously, they'll tend to choose what serves them. And I think that's one of those things too that kind of comes back to that information processing, because Well, medicine says that genes are bad, some genes, or they're broken. And that's what causes cancer, which is also bad. And so me as a human being, my consciousness is preoccupied with all these things that are bad, they're going to kill me. I got bad genes, that sucks. And they caused cancer, that sucks too. I mean, this is literally like a mantra, right? It's cancer sucks, you know? So I got all these things that have nothing to do with me. They're out here, and I'm aware of them. I'm not aware of my awareness of them. I have no awareness whatsoever that I'm conscious of these things, and that my consciousness of those things may be playing some important role. We won't even say the role, but let's just say an important role in my experience, in my reality, and all of these different things. And when I begin to become conscious of my consciousness, aware of my awareness, what happens is, if I say negative emotions cause disease, and I feel, and I have a negative emotion, and then I say, oh, damn it, that's a negative emotion, that's really going to get me. If I'm aware of my awareness, I'll say, wait a minute. What am I aware of right now? I'm aware of what I don't want. I'm aware of doing the wrong thing. I'm aware of the consequences I don't want. I'm very conscious of being other than I should be. I'm conscious of problems. And what happens is I start becoming aware of my awareness. I start becoming aware of where my awareness is directed. I start then naturally and automatically directing my awareness in directions that make sense, that are resourceful, that serve me at a given moment in time. And it's a very intuitive thing. This is what happens when consciousness kind of becomes conscious of itself, and when choice becomes conscious. You start doing what makes sense for you right there and right now. And that, you know, I think ultimately that's kind of what we're trying to facilitate for people. So much of the stuff in Resolve is about that. It's like if you join Resolve hoping to get kind of an algorithmic kind of plug and chug, you've got this problem, just do this thing and it'll be, you know, that's not how it works. Because when the cause is consciousness, when the cause is experience, consciousness and experience are literally what we are doing all the time. And we're so good at doing it, we can do it without even being conscious of it. It's amazing. That was the first thing, by the way, that you learned how to do without paying attention to the fact that you were doing it, was being aware of being. Before you learned how to ride a bicycle, before you learned how to walk, before you learned how to do anything. Literally, actually, the only thing that we have always been able to do without being aware of it at all, the thing that we've always had unconscious mastery of, is being conscious, is doing consciousness, you know, it's literally the moment you're born, you were aware of how uncomfortably cold the hospital room was, or perhaps how comfortably warm the birthing bath was if you were lucky, or whatever. And so it's learning to get back to that first skill, that first cause. The thing that was there first was consciousness, was awareness of being in the womb, awareness of being before you were aware of being a person or a baby or a woman or a man or, you know, anything. Before you were aware of being sick or being well, you were aware of being. And that aware of being, there's this kind of pluripotentiality there. It's like pluripotent. Oh, there's the sweet potatoes. There's this wonderful smell of cinnamon that's just wafting throughout this place right now. You were just aware of being, and just like a pluripotent cell in the body can become anything. Consciousness that's unconditioned, consciousness, awareness that is not aware of being anything, it's just awareness. It can turn into anything. It can turn into awareness of being sick, awareness of being well, awareness of being overwhelmed, awareness of being angry, awareness of being confused, awareness of being frustrated, awareness of being not good enough, awareness of being all these different things. And so a lot of what our work is bringing you back to that. And I think that that's the wonderful thing about GNM, is that it's a very physically, very biologically based thing. But all of it's kind of like all roads lead to Rome. As far as I can tell in GNM, every track, every trigger, every conflict, every embryological understanding, every mechanism, it brings you back to consciousness. It brings you back to your awareness of being. It brings you back to experience. And I think that, like, you know, if a person took celery supplements and their liver got better and they feel better, that's great. The fact that GNM doesn't talk about that doesn't mean it didn't happen, right? But GNM has something very interesting to say about the mechanism by which what works, and the mechanism by which what doesn't work, doesn't. And I think that's the key thing, is that I don't doubt that you did X and that you got better, and perhaps even X played a role in your getting better, but have you considered the role that your consciousness of X being the reason you're going to get better, was that perhaps an essential ingredient in that? And yeah, it's just kind of an interesting thing.
And it's even more than like the placebo, nocebo effect, you know, because people are pretty well aware of that. Oh, it's just the placebo effect. It's just your mind healed your body. That's all.
That's boring. We don't want to talk about that. I want stuff. I want stuff because I got an external problem. And so I have to have an external solution. And I'm kind of deflated or depressed or upset if it was placebo effect that did it. It's like Richard Bandler talks about doctors that have these filing cabinets full of so-called spontaneous remissions, and it's almost like they're embarrassed about them sometimes. And it's because they don't know what to do about it, because it's uncomfortable. In consciousness, you can't measure it. You know what I'm saying? And so we just rather not talk about it. Let's ignore it. It's sort of like the invisible elephant in the room that's making everything happen. That's really funny and that's that thing too. Why can't I just accept it, that I shifted my mind and my life changed? Well, because I've got a presupposition that says there was a problem out here, and I can't believe that a problem that was out here, truly independent of me, truly disconnected from the ecology that is me, could be solved by a switch in here. But once I buy into the idea that all the problems out here, and even all the problems in here, are ultimately related to stuff that's going on in here, I become very comfortable with the idea that the solution might reside in there too.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important thing there, that aversion to the placebo effect, because I'm convinced that there's stuff out here. There's a lack of stuff out here that can cause me problems. There's a lack of stuff or presence of stuff inside or outside that can hurt me. And so I got to rearrange reality out here. And I'm not aware of my consciousness being preoccupied with this rearrangement of reality. I'm overlooking that entirely.
And it makes me think of, like the time around which all of this kind of like medicine started. We started looking, and this was the turning point of the world, is when we found out about microbes and we started looking in microscopes. The thing is we started looking at things that we've got no business looking at, in my opinion. I mean, it's cool to learn about stuff. I think it's really interesting, but I think that the more we meddle, it's like we are so myopic as it is. We're so short-sighted that we only think about, what's going on right now. But like you said, we have missed this huge biological history, and the fact that maybe these bacteria are doing something useful, given that they're on every square inch of everything, everywhere, inside and outside, all over the place. And that us trying to demonize certain little ones of them and trying to destroy certain little ones of them in these viruses, which there are literally bajillions of everywhere in the ocean. I mean, there are these particles of life, but the more that we've zeroed in on them, we know all of this stuff now. We know so much about health and sickness, and it's all in these little tiny, let's look at your genes, let's look at these microbes, let's look at this bacteria. And we're desperately looking out for somewhere. We're searching all the corners of the earth for these cures. And it's in the jungle, it's in the rainforest, the cure for cancer. And it's they know about it. It's these little nuts and seeds in this little place. And if you just get them, you're going to be okay. But we are not looking right behind our eyes, because it's too close to home. You can't see it. You don't have our perspective. We are designed to look out and not in. And because of that, we're just desperate to find something out there that's the cause of all of these problems. And that's the problem, is that we're looking. We're researching, and we're thinking that someone's going to get it. One of these days, they're going to find the thing out there. They're not going to find it. It's not out there. It's inside. It's behind the eyes. And that's why so few people see it, is because you have to have inner vision. You've got to see context. You've got to see perspective. You've got to ascend the mountain so you can see the landscape, so you can get out of these negative emotions, these negative states, these places you don't want to be. The reason you're where you don't want to be is because you don't have a full lay of the land. And that's what we do in our work, is it's like let's get you up in the helicopter. Let's go up to the top of the mountain so you can see how you got where you are and how you can go where you want to go. And so it's this perspective, it's this elevation, it's this shift in point of view. It's looking at context. It's looking at the bigger picture of you as an individual, of you as an organism. I think that organismic history, that's the profound thing about what Dr. Hammer discovered, is he looked way back. He looked at evolutionary history. He looked at organismic history. He looked at us as a little embryo, the basic cells that make up everything that is now, and says, there have to be connection. There's got to be a connection here. All of this tissue, it's in different places, but it's made of the same fundamental stuff. There's got to be a connection there. And that's the brilliance of what he did, was seeing that connection and tying it to evolution and realizing, these biological programs must have been relevant at some point along the way, and looking at that. And And it's that bigger vision. It's not looking at right here and right now. Oh, I've got these problems. Oh, what can we do? Let's, take this bacteria off. Let's put this here. Let's do this surgery. Let's get rid of this organ. There's like such a fundamental disrespect for the body, for its history, for the reasons that it does things. When you just start chopping things off, it's because you don't understand why it's there.
Yeah, I imagine that the point of the pin thinks that it's the point. You know what I'm saying? And I mean not just the point, but the whole point. Where and I think that's kind of what we are. So that leading edge of consciousness. It's funny too when you talked about like looking at things we have no business looking at. I think it's great that we have microscopes and telescopes and all that, but I do think it's interesting that I've got my eyeballs here and we interact with people every day. We see people every day, and we haven't figured out yet how to interact with people in a way that's in a way that's healthy, consistently, in many cases, and happy and leads to harmony. And basically, what that means is that like I don't understand what's right in front of my face a lot of the time. I don't understand the people that I'm looking at a lot of the time, and so it's interesting to me that I would think that I could look in a microscope and understand that when I'm sort of biologically, nothing in my history would prepare me to understand precisely what's going on here. I think it's worthwhile. I think science is interesting and great, but it is kind of funny that we as human beings have yet to figure out how to not kill each other over ridiculous stuff. And really kind of ultimately killing each other over anything, it seems pretty dumb if you see it in a broader context. And yet we think that we're going to have the ability to look off into space or look into a microscope and see, better rearrange that here and move that over there. There's kind of like it's sort of a lovely folly to it. You know what I mean? But I think that, like, again, becoming aware of that consciousness, like, and that's taking responsibility for my role in what's going on here. And one of those things we did, what was that? Was that today? Yesterday. We did a video all about awareness, responsibility, choice. And one of the things that occurred to me yesterday was that awareness, one way of talking about what awareness is an increased rapport with reality. What that means is like that I am in, like when you're talking to somebody and you have rapport, they're listening to you, they're interested in you, they're not kind of on guard against you, they're not oblivious to what you're talking about, they're engaged and they're receptive and they're hearing what you're having to say. That's kind of like when I become aware, I'm that way with regard to reality. And it's interesting that reality tends to get that way with regard to me. And what's odd is that I begin to experience myself as a part of rather than apart from reality. I begin to experience myself as a part of that which I'm looking at. There's this kind of line that exists between subject and object. I'm the subject, and this out here is the object, and I'm looking at it, and it's got nothing to do with me. There's me, I'm the separate ego in a bag of skin, and then there's all this stuff out here. And it's interesting that everything that's a border is a medium for exchange. It's a fascinating thing, like your skin. As much as it creates a border or a boundary between you and the rest of the world, it's also a medium of exchange. Stuff is secreted through your skin. Like your skin takes things in, it breathes things in, which is why, like, if you wrap your skin in a bandage or something like that for a long time, it looks really weird when you take it off. You're impeding the skin. Skin is not a border. It's a place where the outside communicates with the inside. And when you begin to think about your relationship to reality in that way, your relationship, let's say, to an illness in that way, or what we call an illness. I look at it, it's a little nasty, it's a little scary, it's very painful, it has a connotation that's alarming to me as a person. When I'm conscious of what I'm conscious of and I'm aware of what I'm aware of, I notice those things, and I recognize that those things might be important. I recognize the way I interact with things might be important. There is a fact of physical reality in my body. There's some scary stuff my doctor said about it, and there's what I decide what he said or she said means. There's what I believe about what he said or she said. There's how I feel about it. There's how I interact with it. There's the degree to which I allow that to influence my experience. Those things are important too. And when you begin to become conscious of how important consciousness is, consciousness tends to align itself with your interests. You notice these things, and you don't have to believe it. It's not like, oh, so-and-so said that my consciousness is important, so that's why it's important. You create these kind of personal experiential reference points for the relevance of what you're paying attention to, for the relevance of your awareness and what you are aware of, and you see the aspects of your reality begin to shift and begin to change. And it's perfectly plausible when you think about the physical human body, and when you think about that, you don't have to get into any kind of like spiritual stuff to think about the connection between the me I experience myself to be, this subjective experience here, and my physical body and the stuff that it is doing. So my psychology, my consciousness, my awareness of being is, at least in part, an outgrowth of my neurology. I mean, this is a fairly uncontroversial statement that my body, in a sense, grew a brain. Sort of the tube that I was grew a brain. That brain became increasingly complex, and at some point or another, the brain developed the ability to give rise to consciousness, to this sensation. It became aware of itself. Do you know what I'm saying? It created kind of a sensation of existence. And subjective experience kind of flowed out of that. My capacity to worry about things, my capacity for humiliation, my capacity for elation, my capacity for all this different stuff. This is kind of like the biological story behind all of this. And so essentially, really all of what German New Medicine is saying is that the emotions, the capacity for emotion, the capacity for subjective experience that is an outgrowth of biology, the physical body, has ramifications for what the physical body is doing. And that makes perfect sense if you think about it, because why on earth would a body have grown the capacity for subjective experience if that subjective experience weren't going to play a relevant role in something that the body was doing? Now, there are obvious examples of, like, I interact with Melissa in certain ways, as you know, as that part of it, but there's also kind of within. So there's like the inter-organismic factor, but the intra-organismic factor is when I'm feeling in danger, how is my body responding to that? And it's not controversial to say if I'm about to get up and give a speech and I'm worried about that, I'm nervous about that manifests in these kind of like micro changes in my physiology, that my heart rate increases. I get these kind of catecholamines, these stress hormones start coursing through my body. And that's because why? Because there's an actual physical danger? No, because my perception and my experience, I'm nervous, I'm anxious. It's what it's like to be me. I feel a little freaked out and my body responds to it. An hour later? No, immediately. My body responds to it immediately. There's no controversy surrounding the idea that our physiology, which is the action part of our body, responds to our subjective experience. As far as I can tell, basically, what German New Medicine says is that it goes farther than that, and that your anatomy, or the actual physical static structure of your body, responds to those subjective experiences too, and that it does so in predictable, patterned, identifiable ways. And these are the biological special programs that Hammer's talking about. There's a sense to that. I mean, it makes tons of sense. I mean, it is a perfectly plausible thing, and it's interesting for me to think about how we already believe certain things that set us up to understand this perfectly. I mean, if you had that personal experience of getting nervous, or I used to be so nervous about talking to people on the telephone that the idea of calling someone, even the idea of answering the phone, I was a weird kid. I'd get nervous about it. You know what I'm saying? And my heart rate these things would change. And so all this is basically saying is that there are less transient changes that can be initiated within the body in response to profound subjective, particularly things that are just like, things that just ping you, what we call traumas. I mean, things that, it's funny too, you got things like people talk about PTSD, and the whole idea here is that some stimulus can be introduced to the neurology of a human being that causes a kind of reverberative effect, that it isn't just an experience that was like, whoa, that was unpleasant. It actually creates changes in the wiring of the brain that then create problems for that individual. PTSD is not an adaptive phenomenon. PTSD is not, or what's described as PTSD is not helpful, right? And so medicine has all of these, I mean, it has this tremendous precedent for believing that traumatic things can happen that initiate natural responses that aren't necessarily adaptive or helpful in the context of modern living. And I think GNM just takes it a step further than that. I mean, it takes it kind of to the logical conclusion, which is, what if so much more of what's going on inside the body is not an accident, not a mistake? Maybe it's not ideal. Maybe it's not what we want to be having happen. But what if the body's doing it on purpose? It is one of those things that, like, and that for me changes how we respond to it. Doesn't mean we never go to the doctor. Doesn't mean we never take medication. Doesn't mean anything in particular. But if let's say you're doing something that's really not helping us, like you and I are in a lifeboat, let's say we're trying to float to shore, and you're doing something that is putting us in danger of sinking. If you're a maniacal person, or if you're a crazy person, if you just lost your mind and you don't care about those things, or you don't know, I'm going to respond to you differently. If you've got a death wish, let's say, I'm going to respond to you in one way. If you think what you're doing is helping us, See, I'm going to respond to you differently. I may restrain you. I may, if my body is doing something crazy with my blood pressure, and I may pharmacologically restrain my body's ability to do that because I don't want to die. I don't care if my body's trying to help me or not. If someone's trying to help me with a butcher's knife, I'm going to, do what I can to prevent them from helping me. But it's different, right? If the body is stupid or broken or adversarial and trying to get me versus if what it's doing makes sense given what it thinks it needs to do. I say to myself, why does this person think they need to be doing these things? Why does my body think that this is useful, that this is adaptive, that this is appropriate? And I mean, basically, right, GNM gives a big, huge template for explaining that. I mean, this is in response to this particular type of conflict. And it sort of changes. It becomes less adversarial, it becomes less meddling, less of that kind of like pompous, allopathic, I didn't even ask myself why I'm doing this. I'm just going to prevent it from happening. It's really funny because I know a lot of I've known doctors in the past, particularly male doctors who, and I knew them personally, and their relationship with their wife wasn't all that great. And I bet it's probably, and this is speculation, but sometimes I do this and sometimes it's interesting, probably because when their wife is all, I'm angry at them, they don't ask themselves, why is she doing that? Why is she feeling that way? They probably just go and try to make it go away. They just, you know what I'm saying? And like that's how I deal with one thing is how I deal with everything. And if something's happening and I don't want it to happen, and my solution is just to make it so it can't happen, and I don't ever stop and ask myself, well, wow, I wonder why that's going on. I wonder how her behavior makes sense in the context in which she's doing it. I wonder how her behavior makes sense in the context of my behavior or what I've been doing. That's a different attitude. Mm-hmm. And I know there's just a lot of doctors who take that approach to their patients, but they're not in the majority. And it's a different way of relating to reality, mm-hmm. I suppose. And that's interesting. A harmonious relationship to reality tends to, how I respond to myself and my subjective experience and my physical body tends to be a manifestation of how I respond to my relationships, how I respond to all those things. And it is about sort of more harmony, more reconciliation, building more rapport, creating more understanding. It's all this expansion of awareness. It's the seeing it in the broader context. You know what I'm saying? Seeing it in a broader, you expand the context as far as you need to in order for whatever's happening to make perfect sense. Mm-hmm. And then you respond at that level. And that for me has just been a really useful thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Are you against antibiotics? Okay, so there's like a behavioral intervention, so taking antibiotics. And here's the thing. I'm not against anything. I'm not against antibiotics. Would I personally use them? It's like you've got to ask the question and the context. You've got to understand, why would a person use antibiotics? From the German New Medicine perspective, does it make sense? That's the answer that I would give from the German New Medicine perspective. It doesn't make sense to take an antibiotic for a strep throat infection because in the GNM model, when you understand why does strep occur? Oh, you had I can't swallow this conflict. And in that moment, your body eroded the lining of the upper 2/3 of your esophagus, there was widening, and then you resolve the conflict. Now the body is healing and restoring the tissue lining of the throat, and it's using bacteria to help that restoration process. And so it literally makes zero sense from the German New Medicine perspective to take a course of antibiotics to kill bacteria that simply are performing a function. They're doing a job. And so, from the GNM view, it just doesn't make sense. It's not, I'm against it, this is wrong, this is bad. It's just, it doesn't make any sense to do it. But if a person, I was working with someone and they were just convinced that they would die if they didn't have antibiotics, that person should certainly take antibiotics because their mind is so powerful. If they truly believe that if they don't take this antibiotic that they're going to die, they need to take it. And that actually is an advantageous thing for them to do, regardless of the biological program and whether, what the antibiotic is going to do to, to their body. Their belief system matters more. And so that's where you've got to look at it from so many different levels. You've got to, I like to give the German New Medicine just like the perspective on, okay, what does GNM say about taking antibiotics? Well, look at the context, look at the situation. Does it make sense? If a person is experiencing something, they're sure they need their belief system is so entrenched in needing an antibiotic to get through this, whatever it is that they've got going on, then they should take it. And so that's where I don't like to give behavioral advice. Take this, don't take that. I want to know, what is your reasoning? Why are you doing it? Why are you considering it? What do you you think is going to happen if you do it, if you don't do it? And so there's so much more to the story than just do this, don't do that. And so that's why I've even gotten away from, giving nutritional advice, because again, it's like, what is your perception of the nutrition and the nutritional advice, and how do you feel about it? Where that used to be the main thing that I did was do this, don't do that. That was like my whole, way that I coached and helped people. But now it's all, what are you thinking about it? How do you feel about it? What are your preset beliefs that you already believe is true? What do you want to believe is true? What do you believe more? So if you're like 51%, I think I need the antibiotic, 49%, I really believe in GNM and I think that the bacteria are doing a good thing, like, that matters where you are on that scale. And so that's why it's like, it all comes down to the individual, their experience, the context of what they have going on. So there's not no black or white, this is bad, this is good. It's just not like that.
I think that's good. The way that I would answer that is similar. I tend to be kind of pedantically systematic. I would say from the German new medicine perspective, right? Antibiotics, there's no role for them to play, right? However, people aren't born into the German new medicine perspective for the most part, and it's not the only perspective that there is. And so if I'm hauling in advice from a doctor that I've seen that says I should take them, and I'm hauling in beliefs that I have, and I'm hauling in all this different stuff, I prefer to explain the concept of paradigms to a person and to explain to them kind of in full disclosure, this paradigm says that there's not really a place for it in it. And it is someone who was operating fully within the German new medicine paradigm would not be taking antibiotics. Is it possible for someone who's interested in German new medicine, though, and who wishes to use those principles in their own subjective experience, is it possible for that person to take antibiotics and still do German new medicine, right? Which is to say to do what German new medicine suggests that they do. It absolutely is possible, and it's not necessary to choose between those things. And one of my big things is I want to help a person. I'm kind of facilitate for them an ability to use as much as they want to use, right? And not create a situation where I say, well, it's them or me. It's my ideas or their ideas. You need to pick one and just get off the fence. Now, there are sometimes situations where I thought you were going to sneeze, so I had to bless you. There are situations where interventions they're incompatible, right? Where you can't do one and the other. And in those situations, I think you just kind of explain I don't know if a lot of those that come up for GNM, because GNM is really pretty laid back when it comes to stuff like that, because it is so subjective focused, One of the things I think that German new medicine does that's useful, like with the vitamin C stuff, is that a lot of people like to do vitamin C for cancer, right? Like the intravenous stuff. It was in that book, the Orthomolecular Medicine, the guy that was in Food Matters. German new medicine says, well, one thing about vitamin C is that it can tend to make a person sympathetic. It can tend to fire up the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. That might interfere with healing phase stuff. Now, that's not saying don't take vitamin C. It's just saying, listen, if you do this, here's one thing that might happen. Kind of take that into consideration. Be aware of that possibility. But yeah, it's about, I think, facilitating awareness, facilitating conscious, that kind of just, let's be conscious of these things. And let's also constantly be framing the context in which we're saying what we're saying. Because I think people are so used to in health, you go to someone and they tell you what to do. And someone told me to stop going to my doctor. Do you know what I mean? And we would never do that. I mean, what I'd like to do is to supplement or to augment a person's understanding of things that they can do. And there's no reason that you can't go to whoever you're already going to and say, okay, German new medicine says that this means I've got a death-fright conflict. Okay, well, can I think in my own personal history of an example of what could have constituted a death-fright conflict? And if so, what's my experience of that presently? What's my perception of that presently? And then I can go to work on that. So much of what we teach here, and I mean, what we teach in general is important, but really what we want to do is to convey to people a shift in experience. I don't want to install into your head information and then have you go off and act it out. What I'd really like to do, and this is something you're really great at, is you don't have to decide us or them. You know what I mean? It's not necessary. It's not high stakes. It's not high pressure. We want to create clarity for you. I'd rather you come away feeling better having spoken with us than come away understanding every single detail of what we talked about. Do you know what I mean? Because that is, in essence, is the solution to all of these conflicts, really, is moving into a place of well-being and creating understanding at a gradual and a sustainable and a comfortable pace for people. and making people feel a little better about where they are right now, regardless of where they are with their health, regardless of where they are in their health plan, regardless of where they are, you know what I mean, in terms of their health philosophy and stuff like that. Let's find a way to start feeling better now. Let's find a way to start feeling more comfortable now. Let's find a way to start introducing well-being now, because the skills that we use to create that sense of well-being now, let's find a way to feel good about what we're learning and talking about here and now, because the skills that you build to feel good about whatever it is that's going on in your life right now are the same skills that are going to allow you to feel better about whatever you're conflicted about, like whatever the origin, the source of your conflict is. And they're also the same skills that are going to help you go on and build a really wonderful life once all this stuff is done. But it's here and now, and it's, you know, am I conscious? Am I aware of all I don't know? Am I aware of all I don't understand? Am I aware of all the things that are inconsistent with what I thought were true? Or am I saying, oh, this is interesting. Here's an opportunity for me to learn and to understand. Here's a tool for me to use at my leisure, not something I'm obligated to you know, take on from these people or anything like that. Here's a tool in my toolbox. You know, you throw it in your toolbox, you get it when you want it. That's that shift in a person's interaction with information that very often creates a greater shift in experience than does the information itself. It's like my capacity to come into contact with a potentially useful idea and to get excited about it, or to feel relieved about that, or relaxed, or whatever, oftentimes matters more than the idea with which I come into contact. And it's not until we begin to appreciate the power of awareness, the power of our consciousness, that we begin to recognize that our experiential responses to what's happening matter as much, if not more, than what actually is going on. I could hear a kind of, you know, silly idea and come away from it feeling better and be better off than if I hear a great idea and I respond to it unresourcefully and freak myself out.
This is okay. So this is a question from a skeptic, and it just is. I think we've answered this before, but it's always relevant to answer. So if someone decides not to get treatment for cancer because GNM says it's a natural healing process, and they end up dying, it's because they didn't believe hard enough or resolve whatever emotional conflict. I'm pretty skeptical. And this advice seems dangerous. So the whole thing about dangerous advice and interacting with the GNM stuff. And that's the thing too, is if you listen to everything that Steve just said, it's like, we don't tell people to do or not to do something. It really has to come from their own understanding of what's going on. So there are people that choose not to do traditional health treatment, and they choose to avail themselves of other natural healing modalities of understanding GNM. And the thing is, when it comes to somebody dying of cancer or dying of a biological program, there are reasons that happens. Yeah, one of them is they maybe didn't resolve the conflict. They're still in this conflict active mode. Their body is still actively adapting, and that adaptation process is extremely expensive. And so a person can die from the process of cancer because they never resolved the conflict. So that's something that does happen. And then another more likely, where more people tend to not make it through, is the healing process, which means they were in conflict for a very long time. There was a lot of adaptation that went on, and now they moved into the healing phase, and it's in the healing phase where their body is doing extensive repair work on the tissue that was adapted during the conflict active phase. And if you layer on top of that water retention, I mean, it's the thing is the human body, it is, fragile to some extent. There is a limit to, it making it through certain biological programs. And that's just kind of a fact of the matter. And so keeping that in mind, those risks are there whether you do GNM, even though GNM isn't something that you do, it's just a recognition of something that's already going on and the reason things are going on, which colors what you choose to do, whether you choose to go the medical route. And I think someone responded saying, like, have you seen the the success rate of medical treatment? It's like the risk is there no matter what. If you've had a conflict long enough that you now have a biological manifestation that you can, that is measurable, that you can look at, that you can maybe even see. I mean, there's a lot of adaptation that took place, and you're going to have to, mentally, you're going to have to go through, whether it's you going through treatment, which again has mixed results, or you trusting your body with the process and doing things to support or mitigate intense symptoms, because that is possible. I mean, you just have to make these decisions and these choices from a place of peace and calm and from a place of understanding. And so, I'll never tell someone to not do treatment or not do surgery. Again, where is their mind at? What are they experiencing? What do they think is the best path for them? But they should also know that going into treatment, having surgery, there are, complications that come along with that. There are conflicts that happen when you are like laying in a hospital bed. There are things that go on in your mind that you may not anticipate until you're like on the hospital bed. So, there's so much to take into consideration. And so the thing about dangerous advice, this isn't dangerous advice, it's just information. And so the way a person chooses to interact with information, because I never tell someone to do this or not do that, it's not dangerous advice. And the perception of someone who thinks this is dangerous advice is someone who's not listening and fully paying attention and really availing themselves of all of the information that's being provided. It's kind of selective hearing, and you're hearing certain pockets and saying, oh, that could be very dangerous for some person if they chose to look at it in this way and they were in this particular situation, and then they could die. And that's your fault. And it's like, well, no, that's inaccurate. You're not really listening and paying attention to the full story. And so there's just a lot more digging to do. If this, if you're still in that skeptical stage, which I understand, this is new and weird and very different and out there information that takes a person with a flexible and open mind who's willing to explore and educate themselves and avail themselves of different information that's just not, everywhere. But yeah, it's a great question and it's relevant, and I think a lot of people have it. So I think it's a good thing to answer.
Yeah, regarding advice that seems irresponsible, it's a pretty non-specific remark or criticism, and so it's difficult to respond to. And I'm generally sort of loath to respond to stuff like that, because anybody can make a vague criticism of something that someone has said. If you can point to something specific where I said to somebody something, and you say, I think that's irresponsible, and here's why, that is something that warrants more of a direct response. For example, you say that you've seen me give a lot of advice to people. I don't think that's true, because I don't think I really give a lot of advice to people here. I tend to talk about general principles with people, and I tend to share alternative paradigms, prefacing them, by the way, with a qualification that says, according to GNM, or that says, within this paradigm, here is a perspective that you might be interested in hearing. That's something that for most of the healing arts, including traditional medicine, they don't normally do. They don't say, from the medical perspective, here's some alternative literature for you, or anything like that. I don't know anyone who qualifies and prefaces and contextualizes the things that they say more thoroughly than we do. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing there is, for your information, I spend a fair amount of my time in talking with people who are going through health crises, helping them to feel better about the fact that they have chosen to go through a traditional medical route. People who are chiropractors, or people who are in alternative health, and for whatever reason they've been brought to the point where they're going through radiation or they're going through chemotherapy, and they are personally conflicted with that. And I'm saying to them, listen, you're doing what seems right to you at this time. You've gone through a certain experience. You trust this doctor. You trust what's happening. What difference does it make that it's not compatible with the paradigm that you and I talked about at some point in the past? What difference does it make that it's not compatible with your understanding of chiropractic or natural healing? What we need to do is find a way to get you to feel better about what it is that you're doing right now. It's that subjective experiences that's hugely relevant. And the idea that it's dangerous to share an idea with other people is itself a dangerous idea, because it presupposes all sorts of disempoweringly unfair things about people and their capacity to hear information and to make conscious choices about how they're going to respond to it. I don't think I need to protect a person from an idea by not telling them about it, particularly if I say, hey, listen, here's a really interesting idea, and here's why it seems interesting, and here are the logical behavioral consequences that might issue forth from that idea. Personally, for me, I haven't heard anything from German New Medicine that would preclude me or prevent me from going and seeking traditional medical advice or help or assistance or treatment, if that were something that I was going to be doing anyway. Now, I can't speak for people out there who are talking about this stuff, because one of my personal experiences is that people tend to be pretty inelegant in their communication with other people. People tend to kind of use information sort of like a hammer. People tend to kind of like bludgeon other people with it. People tend to assume things that aren't necessarily true. My objective here, one of the things is, since this is a German New Medicine self-healing support group, one of the things that we want to do is we want to say, according to German New Medicine, here's what's true. You know what I mean? That's what this group is. It's very clear when a person comes here that they're going to be hearing German new medicine stuff. I mean, so a lot of it is that you refer to the research that Hammer did. You refer to the theses that he came up with. You refer to those things. And you'll see this a lot according to the German new medicine perspective. That's that. Logical consequence-wise, that's really up to the individual what they choose to do with it. And it's not possible to make it impossible for anybody anywhere to misinterpret anything that you say. That's not a possibility. What I think you can do, and I don't think that the way to be responsible is not to avoid discussing certain ideas. The way to be responsible, as far as I can tell, is to frame a discussion of an idea in a way that provides any person that's paying attention with as much information so that they can put it in a place that's useful, so that they can say, okay, based on the things that I believe, based on the things that I've heard, based on the things that I've understood up until this point, here's what makes sense to me about this. And there's a lot of people who think that the way to prevent prevent bad things from happening is to prevent bad ideas, or to prevent certain ideas, or controversial ideas, or ideas that they're not familiar with, or not comfortable with, that they don't agree with. My whole thing, though, before I got into even any kind of health applications of this, was equipping people to be able to interact with information and respond to information and to think for themselves and to say, okay, listen, a lot of people are suffering with very serious illnesses and they're going the traditional medical route and it is not working for them and they're feeling really awful. They're freaked out about it. Physically, they're suffering. And as far as I can tell, medicine doesn't give them anything about how to reframe that experience of going through traditional medical treatment. That's a lot of the work that we do with people. It's like, listen, we don't want to have this kind of conflict going here. We don't want to have this thing. We don't want to make this worse. Here's how we can kind of modulate this experience. Here's how we can respond to this. Here's how we can work on these things. And I've never, and this is this thing too, is there's a tendency, it seems like on social media, for a person to watch a video and say, how can I be critical of this? What could go wrong here? What could be wrong with what this person's saying? How could someone misinterpret this? How could someone hear that and then go do something bad or do something that's not going to serve them? And I don't think that's really a fair filter to put on this stuff. Generally, people who watch these videos with regularity are very clear on a couple of things. They're very clear that this is one of many perspectives. They're very clear that we are not insisting or suggesting that they not go we're not even suggesting people don't go other natural health routes, let alone suggesting that they don't go other medical routes. Do you know what I'm saying? But I don't get all upset and offended when the doctor, who's going to subject someone to an incredibly grueling process of essentially poisoning their body, doesn't refer them to me so I can help them create a bit more positive experience. He's just doing the thing that he's doing. We're doing the things that we're doing. And I would say with certainty, we have never had someone not undergo a traditional route of treatment because of something that we have talked to them. In fact, after talking to me, I think a person, particularly someone from natural health paradigm, which is people who tend to come to us, tend to come from that avenue, they're probably more likely to at least consult with a traditional medical practitioner, at least after talking to me, because I make it very clear there's not a stigma there, there's not a betrayal there, that's not a wrong or a bad thing to do. And there's a lot of people in natural health who are being exposed, because it's like the Wild West, they're being exposed to all sorts of kind of nutty ideas about things to rub in places in your body to cure stuff. And there's a militant and a dogmatic approach from a lot. I went to chiropractic school, and so I know about this, and I'm exposed not just to chiropractic, but to things outside of chiropractic. People are so certain that they're right, that they come into contact with people, and they essentially make it so that those people don't feel comfortable doing anything else. The first 20 minutes of this video was a discussion about the nature of paradigms and sandboxes, and about the nature of models of reality, and about how to interact and respond to information. And I don't know anybody, literally, I know no one in any realm who spends as much time boring the life out of people, framing and contextualizing things to present information responsibly than we do. And so for someone to say, someone to make a general accusation, or make a general criticism and say, I see you present some really irresponsible information, I feel like that's an irresponsible statement. I feel like I've never seen you before. And that just seems to be utterly ludicrous. And it seems to me like one of those criticisms that had I sat and watched and listened for longer and tried to understand more, I probably wouldn't have misunderstood in the way that I did. So, I mean, that's my response to that. I've kind of got, it's sort of a pet peeve of mine, and I'm sort of trying to optimize communication and information and stuff like that. And so when someone makes a criticism that's vague and inaccurate, and not only not accurate, but utterly inaccurate, utterly the opposite really of what's actually true, sort of gets my dander up, and I want to clarify a couple of things. So I hope that was useful. I mean, I don't think that you were necessarily bad in intention in doing that, but it strikes me as profoundly inaccurate to the extent that I don't know what we could do to frame this more responsibly, other than simply not talk about it at all. And I don't think that's something that we're willing to do, and I don't think that's something that's necessary, because the people in this group are by and large very intelligent, and they're quite capable of making decisions for themselves, and they tend to ask questions. Mm-hmm. If they have a question, they tend to ask a question. If they tend to ask a question, it tends to be answered, and the answers that they get are very clear about how they can use G&M to supplement whatever it is that they're already doing. Now, I don't tell people you must go see the medical doctor. I don't tell them that, because I don't think it's any of my business what they're doing. My job is to, I sit down with a person and they tell me what they want to do. They tell me what they're planning on doing. And I say, okay, how can I help you in that process? How can I assist you in this? What role can I play in this productively? And that person tells me, and then I play that role for them. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not interacting with a patient. I'm not interacting with an illness. I'm not interacting with a disease. They got plenty of people who interact with patients and illnesses and disease, and they never look at the person once. They look right through the person. They look right at the diagnosis. They look right at the disease. They look right at the condition. They look right at the statistics, and they're completely oblivious to the person that's sitting in front of them. I interact with the person, and I make it very clear. We make it very clear we're interacting with people. We don't put ourselves out there as, listen, come see us. Don't go to your medical doctor. Come see us. Don't go through chemotherapy. Come see. I mean, the number of people that we work with that are going through chemotherapy, who we are assisting through the physical and psychological hell that is having your body battered in that way, is tremendous. And we're helping them survive that psychologically. And so, that's so much for responsibility.
Yeah, I was going to say... what was I going to say? I was going to say something.
No, you had plenty of time to forget.
I've gotten emails and stuff of people who say kind of like thank you, I guess, for being brave enough to talk about this paradigm, because I think a lot of people, even if they're interested in it, they don't want to put themselves out there as like talking about it because of things like that, because of the potential for misunderstanding and misinterpretation and people hearing, snippets and little clips and not like getting the full story. And so, yeah, we do go out of our way to make, this information as, accessible as possible, as understandable as possible, and then as useful, like practically useful. Like, what do I do with this? And for us, it's all perspective shifts. It's all let's change the way we're thinking about this. That's what the whole entire Resolve program is about. And for those of you who don't know what that is, every single month we create an in-depth deep dive into understanding all of the nuances of a particular conflict that initiate a certain biological program. So we just finished for November. So for this month, we created a module, and there's like 7 videos and a deep dive note pack and journaling exercises and guided meditation, all about the feeling too slow conflict, which if you're like caught off guard and you're like feeling too slow, you're feeling behind, you're feeling like you're not where you need to be in life, that you didn't get something that you needed to get. You needed to get money, you needed to get a job, you needed to get something, you didn't get it. Now you need to like hurry up. Your body initiates a biological program that causes proliferation of the thyroid gland so that your body produces more thyroid hormone so you can speed up and get the thing that you're trying to attain. And so, so that's a biological program. A lot of people, what do? They have surgery, they'll do different things to get rid of the nodules. But the thing is even if you have surgery to remove a cancer on your thyroid, that doesn't get rid of the predisposition to feeling too slow and feeling behind. And so that's where even if you do truly all of the medical recommendations, you still have to address the perception that allowed that conflict to take place. And so that's what we do in Resolve. Gosh, I feel like we've been on this video for like 2 hours now. Also, another thing that we're doing starting tomorrow night, Sunday night, we're starting a 5-day awareness challenge, which is our way of helping people to develop this conscious awareness. We have very specific exercises that we take you through. And so it's a free challenge to participate in if you're in the GNM self-healing support group. The videos will be live in there each evening at 7 p.m. PST. I guess it'll be a different hour too. So we're falling back tomorrow. So it'll feel like 6, but it'll be 7. So yeah, but we hope you found this video helpful. We got into so many different things, but I think it was really good. So thank you for being here. If you like this stuff and you want to help share it, please share the video. If you're in the GNM self-healing group, I posted this video live on my Dr. Melissa Sell page, so you can share it from there. But yeah, we're just trying to reach people with ideas, because ideas are not dangerous. And, you know, I think that that's so important, that we not be the thought police, that we not close people off to perspectives and paradigms that could radically transform their entire life, their health, their experience, because we're afraid that they might misinterpret it. And so, yeah, that's what we, you know, and I think we're actually pretty good at doing that, is making sure that people fully understand the full context in which this, you know, any advice is given is from the GNM perspective. And then what you do is how you relate to it. So thanks, guys. Have a great night. We'll see you later.